Randy Moss is an absolute imbecile, okay? He came out with his top three wide receiver rankings and decided to rank himself, then Terrell Owens above the GOAT, Jerry Rice. He, oh my goodness, is embarrassing his children.
So I think everyone realizes that Jerry Rice's career wide receiver numbers are far better than any other wide receiver ever. But just to show you how much more dominant Jerry Rice was than Randy Moss in a career sense, let me go through their numbers really quickly. So let's just go through receptions. Jerry Rice, 1,549 receptions. Randy Moss, 982. Career yards. Jerry Rice, 22,895. Randy Moss, 15,292. Finally, receiving touchdowns. Jerry Rice, 197. Randy Moss, 156. Just so you guys realize how big of a gap this is, it's 567 receptions, 7,603 yards, and 41 touchdowns. That is an all-pro level player's career larger than Randy Moss.
Yeah, but everybody likes to talk about how Jerry Rice wasn't as good in his prime as Randy Moss, but even that is incorrect. Looking at Randy Moss's career best season, which some people may argue is the greatest wide receiver in history, back in 2007, where he set the NFL record for most receiving touchdowns in a season with 23. He had 98 receptions, 1,493 yards, and obviously 23 touchdowns. He did this in 16 games. However, if you want to look at the year where he broke the record for the 22 touchdowns held by Jerry Rice, all the way back in 1987, Jerry Rice did those 22 touchdowns in only 12 games compared to Randy's 16. Jerry also had 65 receptions and 1,078 yards.
And the beauty of this comparison is that might not even be the best year from Jerry Rice. So yeah, he had 22 touchdowns, one less than Randy Moss's in 4 less games. Now, he had about 300, 400 yards less, right? Well, let's look at some other seasons by Jerry Rice. 1,848 yards, 15 touchdowns on 122 receptions at age 33 in 1995. Also, there's another year, 1,502 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns. 1,503 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns. Like, it just goes and goes and goes. And so, yeah, we're looking at these stats, and clearly Jerry's winning in the statistical department. So, cool, right? He wins in the stats, but we all know that stats aren't everything. Well, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into when the game matters most. I decided to look up who had the greatest Super Bowl performances of all time. And 3 of the top 4 were Jerry Rice himself on the 49ers, all 3 of which were Super Bowl wins, and 1 where Jerry Rice received the MVP award. In those 3 games, 10 catches, 149 yards, 3 touchdowns. 7 catches, 148 yards, 3 touchdowns. 11 catches, 215 yards, and a touchdown. And then also, Jerry Rice lost a Super Bowl as a member of the Oakland Raiders with 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. So you remember that season that we were talking about, Randy Moss, that 2007 season? Oh, one of the greatest receiving seasons of all time? Well, in that year, in the Super Bowl, Moss had 5 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown. So pretty much the same stat line, but even Jerry beat him out at 40 years old. So we brought up the wins. We brought up the clutch performances. Now, what about the accolades?
So looking at the career accolades, obviously we have the Super Bowls, but let's look at who has the most career receiving yards leader. Jerry Rice, he has 6. Randy Moss, 0. Let's look at the NFL receiving touchdown leader. Obviously, Randy Moss was known for scoring a ton of touchdowns. He's got to beat Jerry in that category, right? Well, Jerry Rice has 6. Randy Moss, well, he has 4. Let's look at the season reception leader. Jerry Rice, he has 2. Randy Moss, 0. Now let's look at the final thing. NFL Offensive Player of the Year. Jerry Rice, he has 2. Randy Moss had one of the greatest wide receiver seasons of all time. Big ol' 0. Randy?
So what's really the argument for Randy Moss then?
There is no argument. And this isn't to throw shade at Randy Moss whatsoever. Randy Moss is one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. But Jerry Rice is probably the greatest football player who ever lived and is so clearly the greatest wide receiver that even saying that you're better than them is just downright disrespectful. That's going to be it for this video. Huge shout out to Randy Moss for giving us this great content. We love to see that on the Worst Take Network. Had to shout out the boy Randy for that awful take. Anytime we see an awful take like that, we're going to shout you out. We're going to have you on Worst Take Wednesday live on Twitter. We're going to do all that type of stuff. Make sure to check into this YouTube channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so anytime anybody else says something blasphemous, we come after them. We put them in their place. This is McConnell from Worst Take signing out. See y'all next time. Peace.